House continues its hearings on charter change with a view to wrapping up debates by next month. Former President Rodrigo Duterte warns of the possibility they may tweak term limits later on.
President Bongbong Marcos has arrived in Canberra for the first of two trips to Australia in a span of a week. Right away, he meets with Prime Minister Anthony Albanese.
But before he left, President Marcos had one piece of advice for embattled religious leader Pastor Apollo Quiboloy. Just face the House and Senate hearings.
Welcome to the show. I'm Regina.
I'm Gretchen.
And I'm Shawn.
Another packed news day today, with the lower house holding its second hearing on charter change with a view to wrapping up committee deliberations by early March, and also getting to second reading the week of March 11. Deputy Majority Leader Neptali Gonzalez also says he sees no problem with holding the plebiscite alongside the 2025 midterm elections in accordance with President Marcos's wishes. Gonzalez is also the floor leader of the Committee of the Whole, which is deliberating charter change.
My sense lang, there's no problem with that. In fact, that's very practical and very economical, considering that isasabay mo lang sa election next year, at considering that if we will go by the yung PCOS machine, whatever, lalagay ka lang naman doon ng portion na yes or no. So, talaga yun. Wala talaga additional cost that you can say.
The House is eyeing final approval of resolution of both houses, or RBH 7, before the Holy Week break in March. The Senate, on the other hand, is working to finish it before their break in May. Marcos wants both chambers to synchronize their timings and again do a plebiscite by midterms next year.
There are some legal consequences because a plebiscite is slightly different, not so slightly. A plebiscite is different from an election. So if we are able to incorporate the two exercises together as a practical matter, palagay ko makakatulong yun.
At today's hearing, the committee invited resource persons like former Bayan Muna Representative Nery Colmenares and a representative from the Marina, or the Maritime Industry Authority. Colmenares warned about the dangers of opening up to foreign money, sensitive public utilities including power, water, and transportation, while Marina flagged potential risks to national security if these industries were not regulated carefully.
Hindi pa tayo natatakot pag hawak ng isang dayuhang bansa ang ating kuryente, ang ating tubig, pati nga transportasyon at komunikasyon, may problema tayong malaki. Because this is the lifeblood of society, Mr. Chair. So, kung mabuksan natin, pwede na po ba mag-increase ang China from 40% to 80 or 90% sa NGCP?
The presence of foreign ship owners and or operators in the country may mean that our safety and security will also be at risk. The risks in terms of national security through violence, hijacking, piracy, terrorism, and other dangerous acts may also be a considerable threat to the country's maritime industry.
Meanwhile, former Senior Associate Justice Antonio Carpio pointed out that many other issues discourage foreign investors from coming in and once again suggested a reciprocity policy. What that means is that we will allow foreigners to invest in utilities like telcos, power, transport, and communications, provided that their countries also allow Filipinos to invest in the same industries.
Our high power cost, bureaucratic regulations, absence of rule of law, and poor infrastructure are to blame for the low foreign direct investments, not the Constitution. Reciprocity is fair and equitable to Filipinos and foreign investors alike, because if we open our public utilities and other industries to 100% foreign ownership, Filipinos must likewise be able to own 100% of the same public utilities and industries in the countries of these foreign investors.
So So part of that hearing today was tackling once again the definition of public utilities, which the Supreme Court is quite clear on anyways.
They've already said, right?
Defining that date. Remember, this was during when they amended the laws, Public Utilities Act, Public Services Act. And again, this time around, though, the House is working towards getting to second reading by March 11 to 13, and third reading 3 days after the distribution of copy from there. So that's
In
a very
short, by the Holy Week, before the Holy Week.
Bilis,
short
ano?
timeline.
Bilis.
I know.
3 weeks from
I'm
now.
reeling. Okay.
Bakit ba kailangan mabilis? The midterm elections is more than 1 year away.
Well, that's what they're saying, that potentially if they finish this early and they're able to reconcile the versions, that they may hold a plebiscite early. May. Emphasis may.
But then President Marcos said, 13 billion pesos ulit yun. Napakamahal. Nagulat nga ako kasi it sounded like me, very kuripot. I did not expect.
Kaya nga
from
isabay
President
na lang.
Marcos.
daw,
Isabay
diba?
na lang.
Isabay na lang.
Pero may ruling na kasi dyan din, yung Supreme Court, as we were discussing last night, that they said ayaw nilang sinasabay ang plebiscite.
According to COMELEC, na
COMELEC
according
to
to
the
itself is citing Supreme Court.
Yes.
Well, you know, when it comes to charter change, there is a new face. That's been very vocal, and that's former President Rodrigo Duterte, who is back in the spotlight these days. In a live-streamed briefing late last night, he did a long monologue again. Na-miss niyo ba yun? On a number of issues,
Covering the late-night pressers.
including, of course, charter change. He warned that there was always a chance lawmakers could tweak the Constitution to amend term limits later on. Let's listen in.
Whenever you open the Constitution for changes or amendments, you cannot place restrictions or conditionalities na hanggang dito ka lang. When you open it up, it's all for the taking. Plenary talaga yan. That's why ako nandito. Sabihin lang na kayong mga congressman o senador, huwag ninyong pahabain o paiksiin yung termino ninyo. Let it be where it is. Kung magsabi 6 years ngayon o ganon, hanggang dyan lang.
I don't know about paiksiin yung terms. But
Oo nga eh.
definitely.
Hindi, kasi di ba pwede rin parang 3 years pero times
That's
longer.
right.
Oh, you
Men,
can
hindi
repeat so
pwede,
many times.
pwedeng
You can-
longer
you
than
can
3
get
times.
elected.
Or
You can
four
have many
times
terms.
3. So,
4 terms.
Okay.
Then 4 times 3. No, but again,
Remember-
they keep stressing nga na economic chacha lang. But, you know, once you change the Constitution, I mean, honestly, you can change whatever. Diba?
Oh, that's
if
former
it has
president's point.
happened and there's a precedent, it's kind of easy to
Easier.
imagine it happening again, right?
Except these are unprecedented times.
Yes, and-
but that may be a point by, from former President Duterte na, oh nga, no, once you open it up, what stops you from
Adding in a provision here and
here and there, or
right?
further down the line, maybe not this time around, changing something else,
Well,
right?
perhaps that's why they've been so mired no, in procedural talks about how the voting's going to be, how the rules
Because
are going to be.
that's what it's going to come down to.
Yeah, that's what it's going to come down to. That's going to be your only
Unless
safeguard.
otherwise provided by law. Those are the
Congress has
five.
stressed over and over that this is an economic chacha, yun lang daw talaga. And there will be no political amendments. Tingnan natin kung nasa na ba yung RBH 6 of the Senate, RBH 7 of the House. They seek to amend economic provisions of the Charter, but both are still at the committee level at the respective chambers. And ito nga sabi nga ni Presidente na hindi naman nagmamatter kung sino daw mauna because they have different timelines. For Congress, it's March and it's May naman for the Senate. As long as we do a plebiscite alongside the 2025 elections, yun pa rin ang inaano niya.
Siguro mawiwindang na yung
Pinipilit niya.
COMELEC, no, kung alin ba talagang timeline ng susundan at kung kailan pa talaga gagawin ito because bago-bago na rin, yung sinasabi ni COMELEC Chairman George Garcia. And all of a sudden nga, no, this 13 billion peso amount is being bandied about. This is after, of course, COMELEC Chair Garcia said that the government nga can save 13 billion pesos if isabay natin yung plebisito sa midterm elections. But yun yung una niya.
That's where the figure first came
Came
from.
out.
It was COMELEC, I remember now. Okay.
Right. And
But the point is, remember, we've been talking about this in the last couple of days as well. Even COMELEC Chair George Garcia himself has changed his tune on the matter.
Kaya naman, idagdag na lang.
Initially, he said you can't do a plebiscite together with the midterms, and a few weeks later, he changed his mind completely,
saying na kaya, and actually
you can
makakatipid
save
nga ng
13 billion. So what changed? I'm not sure.
Okay, so anyway, no, with the 13 billion peso headline figure that everyone is using now, even Senate President Miguel Zubiri issued a statement saying that 13 billion pesos is a significant amount that could be allocated towards critical infrastructure projects and social programs. For Senator Sonny Angara naman, no, kailangan daw araling mabuti ang ilalagay na mga tanong sa balota. Let's listen to what Senator Angara said.
May konting adjustment dyan kasi we have to see ano yung final na ilalabas sa balota. So, yun yung mga operational details na kailangan pag-isipan.
And for her part, Senator Risa Ontiveros remains consistently against charter change.
Ako po'y tutol sa chacha, whether sa economic or sa political provisions, whether sa pamamagitan ng People's Initiative, lalo na itong peking PI nila, o sa pamamagitan ng isang malakon-as na proseso dahil hindi pa nga sigurado con-as ba ang ginagawa ng Senado o ng House sa ngayon.
Joining us tonight to weigh in on Chacha and all the recent political developments, we have Attorney Edwin Lacierda, former presidential spokesperson under the administration of the late President Noynoy Aquino. Thank you for coming all the way here to talk to us in person. In person is always better, I guess.
Yeah.
We have lots of questions for you, but let's start with what's in the headlines right now, which is Chacha. You're a lawyer yourself. What do you make of all of this?
I think this is the first serious attempt by any administration, and it's a two-pronged attempt. Previously, you have PIRMA, that's People's Initiative. Now you have a two-pronged attempt, first from the Congress side and then on the People's Initiative side. But both apparently appears to be generated by Congress itself, the lower house specifically. So you've got this whole thing going on the lower house, which is proposing economic provisions, quote unquote. And then you have the People's Initiative, which is a supposed People's Initiative. But I think both will be settled on the issue, assuming that they agree on voting, assuming that the position of the lower house will be to vote jointly, and then both measures will reach the Supreme Court.
So, in short, are you getting a sense that this time they might actually be successful? In light of the fact that in almost every administration in the past, well, I don't know.
Or is it just like this is the only time it's gotten this far?
On the Congress side, yes. There's never been any attempt on both sides of the House, both chambers of the House, to discuss economic provisions. I think that's never been done before. People's Initiative has been done under, I think, Ramos, I think under GMA. Under GMA's time, it was because of the vote of Chief Justice Panganiban, who GMA thought was an ally, then suddenly just flipped and voted against PIRMA. So, but this is really a two-pronged attempt at trying to amend the Constitution. The problem there is, there's no the fact that the Constitution provides an avenue for amendment and revision admits of the necessity to amend it when necessary or when the people feel that the conditions require a change in the terms. The problem is really more on the political side. Because remember, we are a people that was governed at a certain point by dictatorship. So the memory of changing the Constitution to suit political conveniences is very strong on our part. So whenever one says economic provisions lang, the question is it really just strictly economic provisions? But I think like what Shawn said a while ago, once you start opening up the Constitution, discussing the constitutions, it's not limited only to the economic provisions.
How can that happen? Can political amendments be inserted in the discussion, or will this be the first of many?
Because remember what Congressman Gonzalez said. When you are doing amending of the Constitution, you are performing the constituent function. It's really the base, that's only the right of...
Constituent assembly.
Yes. And so you can change anything, you can introduce anything, because your main purpose is to amend the Constitution. You can start off with just saying economic provisions, but someone somewhere there will attempt to put in political provisions, a change in political provisions. There's no, look, if you're going to strictly argue that we need to amend the Constitution based on economic provisions, because under the guise that we need to improve our economic numbers, we need to attract foreign direct investments, the proof of the pudding, for instance, and not to angat our bangko, was during the time of President Aquino, our numbers went high. In fact, it was the first time that we achieved investment grade rating without amending the Constitution. I remember during our time as well, some of the cabinet secretaries were also arguing for amending the Constitution. And what did the President say? He believed in two things. One, I'm referring to President Aquino, the late President Aquino, the predictability of business rules and a level playing field. That was the only requirement that he did. So we leveled the playing field, we made the business rules predictable. So when you invest, you don't change the rules midstream. And so there was a consistency in the business rules, and that's why foreign investments came in.
Right. Secretary, are you buying this promise that it's only going to be economic? I mean, repeated assurances from different members of the House, of the Senate. I mean, these are all said on the record. Also, recently we've seen lawmakers flip-flopping just weeks apart. They'll say yes and then no 3 weeks later. What do you make of all of this? And how at risk are we for political amendments? Once talks about chacha get fully rolling.
You know, political changes or amendments would also not be in and of itself bad, assuming you've got good intentions. The question is, who are we protecting? When we amend the Constitution, the political provisions, who are we protecting? Right now, if you look at the entire political system of our country, the congressmen and the senators, it's a huge cottage industry. From national positions to the local government positions, you've got dynasties, same family names. That's why it's called the cottage industry right now. People, instead of going to business, they just go into politics. The same family that could have been more productive are entering politics. And that's the problem here. Are you going to perpetuate a system of same families? And we have a study based, I think, in Ateneo School of Government, where it stated that in provinces where dynasties govern, the GDP of that particular province almost always is lower than the rest.
So are you saying you're not necessarily against amending the Constitution?
Because it's one of the realizations that, and also a provision provided by the Constitution, that there's no law that cannot be changed. That's what they say. There's no irrepealable law.
Then how do we solve the problem of dynasties, for one?
Well, number one, it has been, people have
Then you
tried.
have to change the law too.
We can do a people's
No, wait.
initiative.
There
Do
is
we
a-
look into that?
Because that's a
That's a-
deep-seated problem.
We have attempted to do that during our time. There's an anti-dynasty. By the way, there's an anti-dynasty
Yes, it's
provision
still
in the
pending.
Constitution.
Yes.
However, the Constitution said, the Constitutional Commissioner said that we will leave it to Congress to come up with an enabling law. That particular provision is not self-executing. So Congress has to come up with a law that should do an anti-dynasty provision. But
obviously,
Obviously.
they're going to try to delay that, right? So how come you think nobody has been brave enough to file a people's initiative now that we know it can be done?
Pwede naman pala.
Pwede naman
Oo,
pala.
ang dami nating gustong baguhin.
You could get somebody completely unknown, like Mr. Noel Oñate, to push for something like this. We could get
Grabe
like
naman,
someone more
unknown.
like we didn't
We
know
know
who he
him
was.
now.
We know
He's-
him now, exactly. But
The
I
whole
mean,
country knows him now.
right? But there could be some big celebrity or something that talks about it, and we can just take it from there.
Pondo. Look at the Senate hearing. So there's a question on funding. They refuse to disclose who's funding the entire People's Initiative. You may have a good, famous artista there, but the funding requires a nationwide. Remember, it's a 12 and 3 rule. 12% of the registered voters and 3% in each legislative district. That's a huge expense. So who's going to foot that? Obviously, the money, business people will live with whatever is the business rules. And politicians would not want to change change that. They would like to change for their own benefit, for instance, extending their term limits from the national to the local. So those are the problems that confront us. There's a question, in essence, of good faith.
Right.
I think also on the economic side, they're talking about allowing foreign investments. There's been survey after survey that when you're talking about economic provisions, if you allow land to be owned by foreigners, that's a no-no. And on the political, if you change the way, if you prohibit the people to directly elect the president, they're not going to go for it.
Okay,
So
well,
this-
procedure a lot in the lower house, which has started their hearings early. What do you think about where the talks are going with the RBH 6, RBH 7 here, talking about voting jointly and adding unless otherwise provided for by law? Are these enough to make us, sleep better at night?
If you're going to do, for instance, if you're assuming that they're going to vote separately, because this is the Bernas way of amending the Constitution. That's
Right.
proposed by Father Bernas, to vote separately. And if you're limiting...
Pero wala
your-
sa Constitution yun.
No, it's
It's
a
not
mode.
clear.
The mode is...
Open.
It's
The
open.
Constitution is silent
But
on
both
it.
of them are... because you're fundamentally satisfying the fact that you're going to vote separately. The issue in the People's Initiative is they're saying, let's amend it to say voting jointly. Then you emasculate the power of the Senate.
Right.
You're no longer doing it as a two-chamber
Which
rule.
is
But if
their
you
point.
maintain the two separate, then that's okay. And if you limit yourselves to economic provisions, then that's fine. I mean, as long as you don't touch the land, foreign ownership, as long as, for instance, what they're saying, Nery Colmenares was saying, it's no longer about just foreign-owned, but national security issues. NGCP comes to mind.
Can I just pick apart your argument that you didn't need to change the Constitution before under President Pinoy in order to lure foreign investments? That was but nearly 10 years ago now. It is also true that times are harder. We are competing with our neighbors now for their investments. You've seen the rise of Vietnam in the past decade alone, and now we're competing with them. I don't have the numbers right now, but I know ours is a paltry sum compared to what they're getting every year. So, given all the externalities around it, does it not come back to the question of, okay, let's make it more appetizing, let's make it more palatable for investors
I
to come
agree
here?
with that, but the question is, do you need to change the Constitution? Would it be rather that you're making it doing business easier? That's what we call ease of doing business. You're making rules, diminishing the number of permits that you come up with. It's more on the day-to-day actions that you change the whole policy, but the day-to-day might still be the same. And we've seen that. I mean, the fact that if you're able to, look, the Constitution was enacted in '87. President Aquino came in 2010. We grew because he changed fundamentally the concept of ease of doing business. For instance, one of the things that we were able to do was minimize corruption on public infrastructure. You know how we did it? We enacted the public-private partnership. We allowed private investors to come in and fund the infrastructure. It's being done, continuously being done right now, and they're reviving. President Duterte removed that PPP. President Marcos is bringing back PPP. That you take it away from public funds, you allow private funds to come in, like what they're doing with, for instance, the rehabilitation of the airports.
Right.
The private businessmen will be mindful of the expenses going on there. So there's really, you curb corruption. And all our numbers, by the way, during that time were up. We were lower in corruption. We were high in transparency. These are just basic governance. That's why we say good governance is good economics. If you govern well, if you implement your rules properly, people will come in. It's really predictability.
Going back to good governance, one thing we were discussing here the other day was that, again, these are unprecedented times, and one thing that is unprecedented, I think this happened right after the term of former President Aquino, is the supermajority, which is a really overwhelming number. Do you think this kind of railroads a lot of bills and what dictates kind of what happens politically and policy? It dictates?
No, wait. Congress has never changed. Here's where you look at it. In the Senate, it's always what we call, there are 24 republics. The senators are more independent than the House. The House will always elect a speaker based on who the president desires. So you've got political parties there. So for instance, I'll give an example. In the time of President Aquino, he was I'm not a member of the Liberal Party, but suddenly, I remember the joke was, before 2010, ang Liberal Party kasya lang sa isang kombi. When President Aquino became president, I mean, the Liberal Party just ballooned. Then after he left, the Liberal Party was diminished again. So there is no, really, strictly speaking, political parties. There are no principles that govern the political party. It's whoever is the president. Everybody goes there with a handful of opposition members. That's never changed. The supermajority has always been there in the House. The president controls the House. So he can dictate on the House through the Speaker. So whoever, whether it's President Aquino, GMA, Estrada, Duterte, it's always been like that. The problem is with the Senate. That's why you have to curry favors, work with them, and because their vote is higher, more powerful than, and they have national prominence, unlike a congressman who's a district of this and that, who are totally unknown.
But are you seeing that they're also more pressured now? I mean, with the way they've been reacting to charter change.
You mean the senators?
Yes.
Only with respect to their powers being diminished on the voting separate, jointly issue. But you know, everybody recognizes, for instance, that whatever I said today, people would believe that, okay, we need to change economic provisions, and that's fine. If you want to change economic provisions, just make sure you protect national security. It's really going to better the people. And those are the things that should be, and you protect the interests of the Filipino people. So that shouldn't be a problem, but it's again, it's a question of interest. Ang interest ko bilang senador mawawala kapag naging voting jointly because I become a unicameral.
Let's go to 2025. Do you agree that the plebiscite should be held alongside the 2025 elections?
That is not prohibited by the Constitution, because what does the Constitution say when you are doing amendments or revisions, either by People's Initiative or by Constitutional Convention or Constituent Assembly? You should hold the referendum or the plebiscite not earlier than 60 days and not later than 90 days when it was approved, whether People's Initiative by COMELEC and Constituent Assembly by the Congress. So if you're doing that way, you work backwards. So when is election day? Let's say election is in May. So you've got a window to ensure that it is synchronized with the national elections. So you work 60 to 90 days. So that's where you finally approve that. And then that's your work on it. That's how you program so that it's synchronized with the national elections. So for instance, if in this year, by the end of, for instance, in September, the amendments were approved by Congress, they only have between 60 to 90 days to hold a plebiscite. You cannot wait until the national elections.
But sinasabi nila baka mawala daw yung focus ng mga tao dun sa gusto nilang i-elect sa midterms if sinabay sa
Imagine
plebiscite.
a piece of paper back to back.
Yeah.
You're being asked two very important questions.
No,
right?
but you know, when you're election, the synchronized elections really lengthen the list of people naman that you're electing. What's one question that you add? Do you approve the amendments to the Constitution?
We're only asking this.
So you think it's a good idea?
Yeah, because
For purposes of saving costs. But you have to make sure.
Hindi lang yun excuse. It is more efficient
Hindi,
to do
talagang
it.
mas mura.
Mas mura talaga siya.
But you have to be smart enough to make sure that ma-approve yan within that window of 60 to 90 days. So isasabay mo sa if you want to make sabay sa election,
So
that's how you do it.
COMELEC Chairman Garcia correct in saying, because initially he did quote the Supreme Court and he cited the Supreme Court and he said, sabi kasi nung Supreme Court, it's better to not have it at the same time so that people can, focus
Discern,
and concentrate
understand
and
what's trying to be changed.
Okay lang yan.
Plebiscite.
Basta as long as, when did you approve that? Then, under the Constitution, it's mandatory, not earlier than 60, not later than 90 days when it was approved. So if you want it synchronized, maghihintay kayo, mag-debate tayo now until before the 90 days, 60 to 90 days period of the election. That's how you do it. That's how you play it. So, para you save on cost. But otherwise, if they're able to agree, for instance, a month from now, they're able to agree, then they have to hold the plebiscite.
Okay, 2025. Since we're on 2025, we have to talk about the people running. Liberal Party, of course, is in the headlines lately because apparently, according to former Senator Laila de Lima, they've already got 3 on the senatorial slate. Although, I have to point out as well, former Senator Kiko Pangilinan came on our show, one of our sister shows 2 days ago and said he's actually undecided at this point. He hasn't decided for sure. He's still thinking about it. He's weighing his options, as I'm sure a lot of other people are. And that kind of struck me as that's not a good look for the Liberal Party, right? It may present them as a bit weak, a bit wishy-washy. That could just be me. Am I reading too much into it?
I wouldn't know. I wouldn't know the inner workings of the Liberal Party. I'm not a member of the Liberal Party. But since 2016, the Liberal Party and the Dilawans, as they call it, have been demonized by the previous administration, and it's really an uphill climb for them to really go back into the national scene. You really have to do a lot of effort to doing that. You've got, for instance, Bam Aquino, Chel Diokno, and Kiko Pangilinan. You look at the surveys. The surveys would be a best gauge of whether senatorial ka ba o hindi. The thing there is really, unfortunately with the Philippines, it's really kung artista ka, kung may public service program ka, kung meron kang radio program, may TV program pa, that's how you... The problem is really a popularity contest in a different context.
Where does it leave us? Like, people have been clamoring for the one true opposition. Personally, I don't know where the true opposition lies. A lot of people are saying that the Dutertes are coming out and being considered as the new opposition. A lot of people that are loyal to the ways of the past are saying, like, come on, Liberal Party, the pinks, the yellows, let's do something. Can we see something by 2025? Is it too late? Is there still enough time to prepare?
Well, it cuts both ways. I mean, the politicians, the Liberal Party politicians have to be more prominent, and those who believe in them, then they should really just spread the word. I mean, it's not just the heavy lifting will be done definitely by the politicians, by the Liberal Party, but a lot of it also depends on for instance, your awareness that there should be a genuine opposition party. Is that really a top of mind for Filipino people? I mean, we really don't. I mean, when was the last real opposition party? I think the last one was during the time of President Arroyo, because it's really more of the Garcia
So
scandal.
how has the game changed? I mean, ito nga pinag-usapan namin kanina, yung TikTok, di ba? I mean, it has proved to be critical to elections.
Social media has played a very...
So how are you taking that? I mean, how are you planning around it?
Well, you participate in the social media platforms. Unfortunately, it is important. It's like before, dati dapat nasa radyo ka, nasa TV ka. Ngayon, it's gone beyond that. You have to do TikTok, you have to do...
Kahit ano na lang ba sa TikTok? Parang magpapakilala ka lang ba talaga doon?
Or it has to be studied, you know, like they're saying, like in Indonesia recently concluded elections, I think this is what Gretchen is thinking, they consult like professionals, right? What to do, exactly what makes people tick.
What slogan?
Yeah, what slogan? Kung ginawa mo tong dancing, you check
all of those elements were already key to previous elections. The only difference is the platform.
Not only that, it's the richness of data that you can get. It's a kind of data because social media platforms have data that you can harvest and harness. They have data that if you engage more there, you're able to determine what's the psychographic profiles of my followers. What should I do? What should I shouldn't do? The richness of data has been more easily harvested because we now have the metrics and measurements to do it.
So what does the data say about what the pinks and the yellows should do for 2025?
I wouldn't know.
We
leave it to the professional politicians to do that.
Okay, we're going to have to leave that there for now. Thank you so much for all of your insights and coming all the way here. Former Presidential Spokesman Attorney Edwin Lacierda.
Thank you.
Well, up next, 2 trips to Australia in 1 week. What could the president be up to down under? We have all the details next. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're still watching a big story here on One News. President Bongbong Marcos has landed in Canberra, the capital of Australia, for the first of 2 trips down under this week alone. So from today until tomorrow, he's on a state visit on the invitation of Australian Governor General David Hurley. He arrived 7:20 p.m. local time with First Lady Liza Araneta Marcos and has already met with Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. They last met in September last year when they signed the strategic partnership between the Philippines and Australia. The highlight of tomorrow is that he will address a rare joint sitting of the Australian Parliament, the first Filipino leader to do so. He will then return to the country right after that and leave again on March 4, this time to Melbourne to attend the ASEAN-Australia Special Summit for 2 days. In his departure speech today, Marcos said they will discuss deepening the 2 countries' ties on the state visit.
I shall also highlight the huge potential in trade and investment that we should maximize in the coming years. After all, economic security is a vital component of national security.
Quite the honor to be invited to address a joint session of Parliament. So safe to say there is much on the agenda for this trip. What else can we expect Marcos to do in the land down under? Brian Basa has the rest of that story. Brian, go ahead.
Hi, Reg. Being one of the country's closest allies when it comes to defense and maritime security, President Bongbong Marcos is expected to discuss in his scheduled meeting with Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese the escalating tensions in the West Philippine Sea.
I will make sure to acknowledge the ever-growing relations on defense and security with one of our only 2 status of visiting forces partners, as highlighted last year by the success of Exercise Alon and the Maritime Cooperative Activity. I anticipate an enhancement of the mutual understanding between the Philippines and Australia, as we share a common vision not just for our bilateral relations, but for the peace and security of the region as well.
Following the recent harassment by China and the placement of a floating barrier in Bajo de Masinloc, the president is concerned about the safety of Filipino fisher folk.
It's worrisome because there are 2 elements to that. One is that it's the dati Coast Guard lang ng China ang gumagalaw dun sa area natin. Ngayon, may Navy na, sumama pa mga fishing boat. So, nagbabago ang sitwasyon.
President Marcos is scheduled to return home tomorrow, but on March 4th, he will go back to Australia to attend the ASEAN-Australia Special Summit. Back to you.
Thanks so much for that update, Brian Basa.
Now, before the president left, he held a press conference where he laughed off the allegations of Pastor Apollo Quiboloy that the president is working with the U.S. government to assassinate him.
Walang may gusto mag-assassinate sa kanya. Bakit siya assassinate? Siguro natatakot siya dahil sa mga pangyayari. Just face the questioning in the House and in the Senate. Ngayon, kung sinasabi niya hindi totoo lahat yan, hindi totoo, walang nangyaring ganyan, di sabihin niya. Kung makapunta siya, sagutin niya lahat ng tanong, di tapos na.
Also, literally, he laughed off.
He literally laughed it off. Of course, unless you're hiding under a rock, you should know that Pastor Quiboloy is a subject of a Senate probe into supposed abuses in his church, the Kingdom of Jesus Christ. And he is also on the most wanted list of the FBI for multiple charges including sex trafficking and fraud and coercion. At isa nga sa mga lumalabas sa Senate hearings ay itong testimony ni alias Rene, saying na nakita niya si Pastor Quiboloy giving a bag full of guns to former President Duterte and Vice President Sara Duterte. Again, long-term allies, sina former President Duterte at Quiboloy. And just last night, former President Duterte likewise reacted to that allegation. He said that marami na raw siyang baril at hindi na raw niya kailangan to ask for more guns from the pastor.
Kami magtanggap ng baril kay Pastor Quiboloy. Ako pa ba ang mag-deliver sa kanya ng kanyon bukas o machine gun? That's a very stupid proposition. Bakit man si Pastor mambigay ng baril sa akin? Sama siya magkuha. Kung magsabi siya wala siyang baril, bigyan ko siya.
He's very Didn't he register more than 300
Yes,
guns?
he did.
I think it was last year. I can't
All
remember
together
anymore.
from Income Krame, right? So,
Which raised a lot of questions. But anyways,
Anyway.
The former president also downplayed pending charges against Quiboloy in the U.S.
Malit na kaso yan. America would not go into that. But what I can say is that maybe somehow his life is in danger.
former President Duterte says he does not know where Quiboloy is hiding right now, but he did give the pastor a piece of advice.
Get yourself arrested. This is a free country. If you do not want to go there, get arrested. I'll give him the free choice.
Oh, yan na. Advice from
From a
President
lawyer.
Marcos, advice from President Duterte,
diba?
face the Senate, and get yourself arrested.
Pero yung lawyer talaga ni Pastor Apollo Quiboloy, sinasabi, nandito lang daw sa Pilipinas si Quiboloy. Nagdadalawang isip daw kung mag-attend sa Senate probe because it appears na hindi daw in aid of legislation ito, kundi in aid of persecution.
Okay, sabi naman ni Senator Hontiveros, no, suportado niya ang tawag ni President Marcos to face the probe nila, or for Pastor Quiboloy to just face the probe.
Well, of course, Senator Ontiveros is the one chairing the Committee on Women, Children. Sorry, I forgot the rest of the, but siya yung lead chair of this committee. We are going to pause for a very quick break right now, but stay with us. There's more big stories ahead. The big story will return. Welcome back. You're still watching Big Story here in One News.
Now, there's an Interpol red notice issued against suspended Negros Oriental lawmaker Teves. This was also confirmed by our Department of Justice. According to Interpol, a red notice is a request to law enforcement worldwide to locate and arrest a person pending extradition, surrender, or similar legal action. Interpol, however, clarified that a red notice is different from an international arrest warrant. Teves is facing multiple murder, frustrated murder, and attempted murder charges in relation to the assassination of Negros Oriental Governor Roel Degamo and others. For their part, Teves' camp said that they will pursue all legal remedies regarding the red notice issued against him and the cancellation of his passport.
Red notice hindi ba red tagging ang tawag doon? Anyway, seriously, yun naman pong red notice ay unang-una, expected po namin yan. Number two, well, the government has to do what it has to do. Ang red notice naman po ay hindi mandatory. Ito ay pakiusap lamang sa mga members ng Interpol, ng International Police na kung makikita nyo itong taong ito ay may warrant sa aming jurisdiction, baka pwedeng paki-aresto.
Speaking of manhunts, we haven't heard about Arnie Teves in a while.
Red notice. I would hide
Oo
too.
nga, yun pala yun, ano.
It's Interpol.
But it's
You
gonna
can't
be hard to
outrun
move.
Interpol.
But it's gonna be so hard for him to move around now with the red notice kasi they'll be obliged to make timbre, di ba? Na, nandito siya, nakita siya dito sa
Okay.
airport. Anyway.
Moving on.
Moving on. In other news, El Niño continues to creep in, affecting more areas in the country. There are now at least 51 provinces experiencing the impact of the dry spell, with more than 6,000 hectares of farmlands affected. The National Irrigation Administration says that figure could go up to 275,000 hectares. For Cagayan Valley alone, the El Niño has managed to destroy 180 million pesos worth of crops. The local government has started cloud seeding operations, but they say this is only a temporary solution. Overall, the El Niño has damaged 375 million pesos worth of palay, corn, and high-value crops. Now, despite this, the government says the supply of rice remains sufficient.
Hindi natin dinidiscount yung fact na maaapektuhan po nito yung ani dahil po nagsisimula o pasimula pa lamang po ang dry harvest season. So meron po itong siguro konting kink doon sa ating expected harvest. Pero sa ngayon, we would like to assure the public na sapat po ang supply ng ating bigas at pagkain.
We did talk about this last year for several months. I mean, preparing for the upcoming El Niño, and we're seeing the effects now. Not just there, but also sa Bulacan. Marami nakikita images.
375 million pesos worth of damages, and we're not even at the peak months yet.
Yes,
It's supposed to
they've
peak
just
in April
added,
and May.
Yeah, they've just added 10 provinces to the list of 41 provinces. So now we're up to 51 that are experiencing, like adverse effects. Either it's drought, extreme dry spell.
And the Pag-asa forecasting that the heat index will hit more than 40 degrees in many of these places. 40 degrees Celsius. That's Celsius, not Fahrenheit.
Pero reminder
That is
lang din,
extremely hot.
It actually, even if the temperature does not hit 40 degrees, the real feel always hits 40
Or
plus.
more than.
More than,
40.
like 42, ganyan, no?
Well, it is still February pa lang.
Yeah, that's the point, right?
Di ba ang weird?
Already
Kasi-
hundreds of millions pesos worth of damages.
But you also
Not even the
notice,
peak
like,
period yet.
it's so hot in the afternoons, but at night it's still kind of
But
chilly.
thinking about it, it makes sense now that the DepEd has moved classes to the latter
Back to
part,
the old
right?
schedule.
To the old schedule because
Precisely
of this
because
also.
it's hard for kids to learn.
When it's super hot.
When in the classrooms where they don't have fans, they don't have air conditioning, right? Oo nga naman.
And they're at risk for heat stroke. Okay, before we go, our big picture tonight is the Senate and its most recent guest. We have here senators with former United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. The Senate adopted a resolution honoring the South Korean diplomat for his global contributions. Ban led the UNGA from 2007 to 2016 and helped put global environmental issues on the forefront through the Climate Change Summit.
Not just putting it to the forefront, but also he's the one that shepherded the United Nations to reach the Paris Alignment, 2015 Paris Alignment.
The
which-
Paris Accord. Is that
The Paris
one? Yeah.
Alignment is where all the nations collectively first came together and agreed to combat climate change and limit global warming. So that's a landmark protocol right there. And also SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, were also under his tenure. So his contributions have really been, undisputed.
Yeah, we
and
should
and
check
climate change.
We should actually check that Paris document. Check again how much we've promised to lower our carbon emissions, and see if people actually
Alam ko
follow.
yung next
Countries
target,
actually follow through.
2030 na.
2030, and the problem is his key message this time around. So he addressed, he was here on the invitation of the Asian Development Bank, and then he went to the Senate where he was honored. Yeah, but his key message has been that no country is on track to meet their SDGs, and we're 6 years out, right? So everyone is behind on the SDGs, which is very concerning. That's why he's going around urging urgent climate action. Because as we just saw in the news item just before this, which is we're seeing the impacts of climate change already.
And
It's here.
at the other end
Yeah,
of climate
we're suffering
justice,
it. Yeah.
right?
And we do have front row seats to the adverse effects of climate change. That much we know.
It's here. There's no more denying it. All you climate change deniers, but
and flat earthers. All right.
ikaw yun eh.
Ako yun. All right, that's it for the big story on this Hump Day Wednesday night.
We are One News, all sides, all the time.
Thanks for tuning in. Have a good night.